So some people think that programming is something only geniuses can do. Others think only the minds of a younger generation can comprehend programming, and some think it takes months or years to learn programming languages. Now what if I told you all three of those beliefs were lies fatter than Gabe Newell? So yes, I am a part of the outlying younger generation, which is unchangeable, but in this video I will show you that not only are programming languages rather easy to learn, but that you can learn enough of the language to be fluent in it in a single day. Although a disclaimer, unless you have a photographic memory, if you don't practice the language for enough time, you will eventually forget it. Yet, to prove that it's still learnable and applicable in a single day, I will solve a computer science question or create a moderately complex program in the language chosen. For this, I'd have to choose a language that I've never touched on, but mainstream had thought difficult enough for me to learn. For reference, I only know Python, Lua, C#, and if you're a degenerate and include HTML and CSS as programming languages, you can count those too. However, to match HTML and CSS, I realized that I don't know JavaScript, which is known to be very mainstream and includes frameworks for a bit of extension work too. Although JavaScript isn't exactly known to be the hardest language, I think it's appropriate enough for this video. The final thing to do before I start is to decide a method of learning and identify a goal to prove that I know the language. My go-to method to learn a language is YouTube, which has many channels that explain JavaScript and other languages that I explain rather efficiently. I don't exactly have the time to watch a 10-hour video as I pause through or rewind to understand a concept better. Instead, I've decided to learn off the JavaScript documentation, javascript.info, which I'll use for the curriculum as well. However, I will only learn from the first two sections of the curriculum, ignoring the section titled Additional Articles and anything after that. Also, I may use a video to learn concepts that I may struggle with or the documentation doesn't explain well enough. As for the goal, as JavaScript is a language often used for website development, I've chosen to create one of the originals, a web-based snake game. Now this requires a little bit of HTML and CSS, which I can do, but it will cut a good amount of time from my day, so I'll just generate it before I start to code. The link to the documentation will be in the description. Now it's time to sleep a little earlier today. I'll see you tomorrow, early morning. The first step was to awaken to nothing but darkness at 4:30 AM and take a shower to wake myself up. But still half asleep, I switched on my PC and got straight to coding. Good morning, so it is currently 4:51 AM AEDT time and I'm about to be in, so I'll be back when there's something significant to record. The next hour or so, I just grinded through the first part of the documentation. So I just now realized that I didn't have Node.js installed on my machine already, so I've just wasted the last 15 minutes or so downloading it. I'd like to call out a little bit of a bias here in that JavaScript if statements and data types are thus far identical to that of C#, and it's just something to keep in mind when considering the accuracy of the results of this challenge. And then I hit my first obstacle, which took about 30 minutes out of my time, which I used to take a break. So it seems my Wi-Fi has now given up on me, but I have been working for about 1.5 hours now, so I'm going to take a quick break and hopefully by the time I'm back, it's resolved itself.
Thousands of tears later.
Alright, so I got back about 5 minutes ago, my Wi-Fi was still not working, but it's fixed now, so back to work. So again, a very similar syntax to other programming languages I know, which further this bias. Hopefully it wouldn't impact someone that has no experience in programming that much though. After a few hours, I finally hit the first milestone. Okay, so I finally completed the first subsection of the fundamentals of JavaScript, which I checked was the largest of all the sections by far. This took me roughly 2 hours to do, but there's no indicator to show if I'm currently on track to finish by the end of the day with enough time to create a snake game too. But anyway, I need something to eat, so I'm gonna quickly grab a breakfast and be back soon. See you then. I knew I didn't really have all that much time to waste on breakfast, so I returned to my computer to get back at it pretty soon.
3 days later.
Although this is not particularly relevant to this video, this page brings out some very valid points about structuring your code. No one will want to read and review your code if it's uglier than me, and that's pretty ugly already. But seriously though, I read so many programs from so many different people, all with different programming styles, and so many of them have the strangest formatting that often makes everything very impossible to debug or to even understand for that matter. So now it's about 10 AM and my brain feels pretty fried and bored after 5 hours of repetitive work with 2 20-minute breaks in between. So I think I need another break to refresh myself to prepare for the next 10 hours or so. So anyway, see you in 20 minutes.
15 minutes later.
For the following 7 hours or so, I didn't record much as I already had more hours than I have brain cells of content, so I mostly just stuck with the grind, and with my only break being a 30-minute lunch in between. A couple hours later and it's nearly 5 PM. Sorry about the large time skip, the recordings were getting too long, but I still did manage to grind through the first section of this. So that's the fundamentals of it done, or at least enough of it to be quote-quote confident quote-quote in JavaScript. I thought I could wrap this up by 8 PM, but I think it will extend up to 11 or 12 PM. And yes, before you ask, I do feel like throwing my computer out of the window. I have read more words today than I have in the last 6 weeks, excluding today. But I haven't had a break in over 3 or so hours now, so I think I'll take one before proceeding for section 2.
Several months later.
At this point my progress had slowed considerably as I was becoming more and more exhausted, but eventually it finally hit 11 PM where I completed the last relevant chapter. The next challenge was to test myself, which required me to stay awake. I'm not a big fan of coffee, so instead I put on my headphones, turned it to max volume and blasted heavy metal into my skull. A few more hours later and it's finally 11 PM and I've just barely scraped the documentation in time. Now obviously over the next few days this will slowly fade from my memory unless I practice it, and either way, learning any language just online without your own practice doesn't take you near mastery. The total time this has taken for me is 18 hours and counting. However, I did have a total time of 2 hours break as well, so I can cut that down to 16 hours. Also, for the record, I didn't go through every single chapter in the documentation as some chapters were either outdated, redundant or too niche. However, I am confident enough that I've studied enough of it now to can be considered somewhat proficient. However, the challenge isn't over yet, as I have yet to solve a challenge to prove another language. For this, I have chosen the following problem presented on the screen. Anyway, let's finally end this torture. Although I mentioned that I'd create a snake game, I realized how large the script would have become, costing me maybe another 2 or 3 hours, which I didn't have in time, but also my mind is reaching its limit too. So I chose the second most appropriate test, solving a computer science problem which I found in the Australian Computer Science Olympiad. And there we go, the program works for both cases. Although I know that the challenge wasn't particularly ideal to display if I've learnt enough JavaScript, however it being 11:30 and me being awake for 19 hours with only 4 hours of sleep, doing basically nothing but coding all day, I'm not feeling particularly flexible. But anyway, there you have it. Is it possible to learn a programming language in a single day? Kind of. Is it advised? Most definitely not. Not only will you have very poor retention of the content, but that long staring straight at a screen is unhealthy. Not to mention the minimal sleep and repeated frustration. And finally, you'll want to give up at least 4 times, absolute minimum, like I wanted to. If you like this kind of video, let me know, but I'm not making another one, that was far too painful. And now I'm genuinely exhausted, and it really is bedtime, so good night. And that, viewers, was my 1-day journey of learning a programming language from scratch. Now obviously it's been a few days since I've recorded this, and the next day I kinda just flopped and stayed in bed for a while, and pretty much only got out to eat and game. But now that I'm fresh in mind again, I can safely say that I do remember a considerable amount of what I learned, but I've also forgotten some key parts of JavaScript. However, my decision of never doing this again is sustained, as this video was a pretty stupid idea to begin with. But anyway, this is a return for my lack of uploading the last few weeks, so I hope you just enjoy watching me suffer. Anyway, aside from dreaming in code, I haven't really done anything since I recorded the main parts of this video, so I think I'll be ending it here too. Good night.